Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, Dutch lacers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, crazies. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome, and let's go to the not so good old USA in this case, and also global. Talking about the fact that now we have right-wing crazies coming out, and they've always been there. If you look back historically, a lot of people don't know that a lot of domestic terrorism, certainly in the United States, has been perpetrated by right-wingers, notably the bombing of Planned Parenthood and abortion clinics and the killing of doctors. And so that's a form of right-wing terrorism and craziness. And so there's a tradition of that. But we're in an era now where it's interesting to see the right-wing crazies come out because a couple things. One, we have the Trump era, and certainly whether you're pro or con Trump, the rhetoric that's been out there by both sides has been very divisive and based on a lot of racial issues. And so it's been very exploitive of this tapping into this inherent racism. But like I say, I think it exists in both sides. It just manifests itself differently. And so anyway, I think in this environment, we have the right-wing crazies getting encouraged to go out there and go on their crusades and perpetrate these events. And unfortunately, it just feeds into the narrative that we have that the right wings are the crazies and the misogynists and the racists, and the left side can point to that and talk about how outrageous they are. But of course, what we see out there right now is the left wing, Democratic base, liberal base, out there behaving very poorly as well and very violently. So as I always say, I think they deserve each other. But and the other part of that quotient, of course, is the symbiotic relationship between escalating violence on the so-called left side and the so-called right side and everything in between. So it becomes very inflammatory, and unfortunately, it's going to feed off each other. And it gets very complicated because some of the events are real and some are not. Some are associated with the big picture and the narrative, and some are not. Let's look at a couple. Of course, we had the Islamic Center in Victoria, Texas, destroyed on January 29th. That's a clear case of right-wing crazies being emboldened by the present environment. And like I say, I think the right-wing crazies not only feel justified in the new Trump era because of the encouragement they get from the right wing, but also because they can justify it seeing the violence on the left right now. Makes it easier for them to rationalize that it's okay too. Then we had another one, the Chicago Loop synagogues vandalized with swastikas. And that's one where we don't really know. It could be true or it could be not, because in this era of propaganda and complete media manipulation that's been completely politicized, there's going to be these faked events. You know, there could be a fake picture. We've seen that happen time and time again in the media. So, but it also shows it's not that we can't learn anything from the fact that there's fake stories being posted, because that's part of the current environment and that we have to watch. The fact that everything is pretty much fake news, and it's so easy to manipulate people with a headline and a picture. And then we had the incident of the Korean grandma who was beaten in L.A. and then supposedly the perpetrator said something about white power. But when I look at the picture, something about it doesn't look right. The blood doesn't look right. It's just too easy of a story to make up out of thin air. A Korean grandma beaten in L.A. I mean, and then the fact that we have these crisis actors. A lot of people aren't aware that there's organizations that hire crisis actors who act out events, including bombings and terrorist attacks and beatings and the like. And so it blurs the line between reality and fiction even more. And then we had that horrible mass shooting up in Quebec, more right-wing crazies, and of course they're loose in Canada as well. So so much for the relative tranquility of Canada. And I see this as part two, where there's that dynamic, that classic dynamic of pressure from above and pressure from below, and creating a pressure cooker and pushing people to do outrageous acts, because the more chaos there is, the more reason there is for the state to come in and take control and restrict liberties even more, and use it as an excuse for more draconian measures, because that's the nature of the state. But like I say, there's these fake hate crime pictures. Huffington Post. There was a case with Denver, and supposedly somebody saying I'm Jewish and gay and was assaulted, and that turned out to not be true. So once again, it's not something I'm pulling out of thin air. That there's a lot of fake stories out there now, a lot of hoax stories, and it has an agenda, and it's to inflame the left and to inflame the right in their own respective ways. And pandering is so obvious. But I'll get into all the pandering that's going on in another video. But I just wanted to talk about right-wing crazies, and it also happens too that we have right-wing crazies being loosed in Europe. We have a lot of problems with, much more so than the United States, dramatically, the immigration problem and the violence associated with immigrant communities and terrorist acts in Europe is a legitimate concern. And the fact is that the swing to more extreme left and right-wing governments across Europe has emboldened right-wing crazies in Europe too. So we see a similar dynamic as what we see here in the United States. The current atmosphere certainly is encouraging this on a global scale, and unfortunately, it could deteriorate even further because it doesn't look like there's going to be any change anytime soon. So anyway, something to keep an eye on. Once again, bear in mind that chaos is created and manipulated by politicians and media, and inevitably it will give them reason and justification and the rationale, and in fact the populace will be begging for it. More controls and more protections and more suspension of civil liberties and other controls mechanisms. So always a good idea to keep the big picture in mind. I'm a useful idiot, don't you be one too.